Hi, welcome back to Sustaining Creation, a faith journey for small groups. In this session 2A, we're going to look at, given all we saw in part 1, why aren't we changing? Why haven't we embraced the difficult truths that we have to change? And one of the things that we're going to look at is that stories inform our life. Stories tell us what makes for a life well lived, but they can also block out difficult truths that disagree with the story that's in our head. This isn't a new human behavior. It's an ancient human behavior. Jesus often encountered in the Gospels when he was trying to give a difficult truth that people would close their ears and shut their eyes. And so when asked, why do you speak in parables, Jesus addressed this in the Gospel of Matthew, 13th chapter. The reason I speak to them in parables is that seeing they do not perceive, and hearing they do not listen, nor do they understand. With them indeed is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah that says, you will indeed listen, but never understand, and you will indeed look, but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and their ears are hard of hearing, and they have shut their eyes, so that they might not look with their eyes, and listen with their ears, and understand with their heart, and turn, and I would heal them. And I would heal them if they would turn. Given all those difficult truths we saw in the first 2 sessions about things we're doing across the world, what's keeping us from changing? What's keeping our ears closed and our eyes shut? It comes about with the stories that we have picked up through life that guide us, that inform us for a life well lived. Where do they start from? They start as early as when we're being held in the arms of mom and dad. And we get told we're worthy or we're not worthy. We told that we are lovable or not lovable. We pick up stories as we toddle on into schools. And in schools, in our education system, we pick up more stories. And on the playground, interacting with others, we pick up more stories. Stories about whether we're lovable or great or fast or slow and not. As we continue on in life, we keep picking up more stories. From our life experiences, from our neighborhoods. If you and I grew up in different neighborhoods, some of our stories are going to be different. And certainly if we grew up in different cultures, our stories are going to be different. And when they differ over what we think are really important, then we clash, even to the point of war. Stories come both willingly and unconsciously. We get exposed to stories in major media, and some of them take hold, and some of them don't. We get exposed to stories in propaganda, and subconsciously some of those take hold. They tell us who's lovable and who's not, who is worthy of love and who is not, who to make war with and who to go to peace with, who are superior human beings and who are less than human. Stories. Right now, the huge story that's guiding our current civilization is that the earth is so big, it's so huge, there's no way that puny human beings can hurt the earth. And yet we know from what we just saw in the previous 2 sessions that we are in fact hurting the earth. And so we've got to let go of that story. And the stories that say that there's always more, because there isn't always more. God gave us one earth to care for. So today we're going to spend time with our wisdom people on stories and try to be open to the new story and turning so that Jesus would heal us and show us the way to live this day and all days.
What is church for? In a time of disruption and discontinuity, are we here to comfort the brokenhearted in their time of grief? Of course we are. Are we here to address the countless pastoral needs that are multiplied under such conditions? Absolutely. But just as important is our call to partner with Jesus in his supreme work to reconcile us to God, to one another, and to all of creation.
The idea that God won't allow us to hurt the creation You know, I'm a big proponent of free will
Yeah.
and choice, and God gives us choices. You know, to how we treat each other, how we live, how we love each other, or share or don't share. And I think it's very clear God allows us to live in the consequences of those decisions, those sins. I think God. My theological viewpoint is that Jesus won't have to come a second time with angels to wipe everybody out that's God's enemies, as many Christians, and pointing to Revelations, are anticipating. You know, Left Behind series, all that stuff. Won't have to, because we're doing a heck of a job doing it ourselves. We'll bring Armageddon on ourselves, because the flooding and mass famines and wars that Revelation talks about, if we keep trashing the planet, we'll get what we sow. I believe that human beings can choose. You know, you go out in creation and you think about the beauty of sunsets and dolphins swimming across the sea. You hear birds as they've come from the south, from the winter, and the snow melts and baby animals and flowers burst forth and trees bud and bloom, and you think, my God, how beautiful is this creation? And at some point you look at some of the pollutants and some of the corporate greed, and you say, this isn't as complicated as we're making it here. Can we live with less so we can simply live?
My understanding of working for creation justice shifted dramatically when I came to understand the history of the doctrine of discovery and the way that we have come to have a modern understanding of other people, particularly people of color, as things to be commodified, similar to a colonist vision of land, water, trees, other natural resources for our use or disposal. And once I saw how the Americas were shaped, it made so much more sense to me how we got into the mess we're in. And now I've learned a lot through the leadership of the Standing Rock Sioux and how they have rooted their entire effort to protect their treaty land and all of our water through persistent prayer and calls for solidarity. I've learned a lot from the coalition of 5 tribes who have successfully protected Bears Ears National Monument in Utah, their ancestral land and more than 100,000 antiquities that showcase their own centuries-old history on this land, and how they rooted that campaign, again, in a call to healing and mutual understanding. I have learned a lot from also tribes that have been alienated from their own land and have continued to hold on to earth-based spiritualities and to bloom where they're planted and continue to care for God's creation even when it wasn't originally their home. If we could look to their example for stewardship principles and truly seeing the earth and all that is in it as our neighbors and as sacred, we could really transform the situation we're in right now.
I'm fortunate and I live along a river, in this case the beautiful Fox River in downtown Aurora. But I want to tell you a story from my youth. I think it's really important for people of gray hair, of the wisdom supposedly, that we keep the stories that formed our lives present and true so that they can inform other generations. I want to tell you a story about the good old days before there was that pesky EPA that would regulate what could be put in the rivers and in the air and in the soil. You know, nowadays people are fond to think of the good old days of the 50s, and they remember Ozzie and Harriet and Father Knows Best very fondly. But they're forgetting some very difficult facts. I grew up near a very different river a river called the Cuyahoga in Cleveland. I grew up on the near west side of Cleveland, and so in my youth, I could look out over the house and see smokestacks not that far off in the distance spewing orange and black. And my dad would say, he'd look at those smokestacks and he'd say, that means somebody's working, son. That's good. Somebody's working. But he didn't say the smoke also meant that somebody was dying. I remember the women in the neighborhood hanging the laundry out on the back clotheslines. And then when the wind would shift, they'd all have to scurry out in the backyard to take the clothes off before the soot came and the steel rust came and coated all the clothing. I remember going along the lakefront in Cleveland and seeing all them belly up dead rotten fish because somebody's sewer pipe had overflowed and threw all those pollution out into the lake. We knew better than to drink in it. Heck, we knew better than to swim in it. I remember along the Cuyahoga River, there used to be a tour boat and a daytime excursion boat where you could go along the river, but one of the tours, and it was called the Good Times 2, went up the mouth of the Cuyahoga. And you could go up the Cuyahoga River, which was lined with industry, and see the industry and see their sewer pipes. But when we'd go by this one chemical plant, if the wind was from the wrong direction, you'd get this strong odor, overwhelming of sulfur, and you'd have people lining on the rails of the boat puking over the side. Imagine that. Paying good money to take a trip on a boat so you could vomit over the side because the pollution was so bad. I remember times when that river, that Cuyahoga River, caught on fire. The pollution was so bad, a river caught on fire. There's a story going around nowadays that we don't need the EPA. The EPA simply kills jobs. That's a lie. The EPA didn't kill those jobs. Greedy corporations that decided it was simpler to make a quick buck someplace else moved those jobs overseas. And they moved them not simply because you could get people to work for $1 a day. They moved them because there were places where there were no regulations, there were no rules, there was no limit on what you could put in the air or in the soil or in that water. And those places today, you can't breathe the air, you can't drink the water, and you better not eat what they grew in that soil. The good old days before the EPA were not good old days. I remember the rain having so much acid in it, it would wash the paint off of cars, as well as kill all the trees. This river, as beautiful as it is now, was one time heavily polluted. You wouldn't dare eat the fish out of it. But they've changed that. They've ruled and made limits on what you could put in the land and in the water and in the air. And that's very, very critical because I drink the water out of that. My water filtration plant takes the water out of that, cleans it up a little and sends it to me to drink. So it's really important, the water, how clean it is, the air, how clean it is, the soil, how clean it is. Here's the truth. The EPA didn't drive away companies. Companies that were only interested in short-term profits chose to find a way to relocate where there were no rules, where they could destroy the earth and all its life systems without any law saying no. I can tell you, as an engineer and as a chemical plant manager, worked in the chemical industry for 32 years, as a company that stayed and found a way to make chemicals safe without polluting the air and the water and the sea, it made us better. Because we could no longer put poisons into the air and into the water, we had to find a way to do it better. And the end result of it is it improved our yields, it improved our quality. The EPA's rules actually made us better. I know at the times, I, like the rest of them, wailed and gnashed their teeth, but the truth is, we became better. The old story of the good old days, bear them with a grain of salt. Learn from them. have the wisdom to know that we have to change how we live on this earth so the future generations have a chance at life. Stories. Stories that inform our life. The stories that we need to question and see if they still work going forward. This one does. Take care. When I was in Paris, one of the interesting things I heard from Bill McKibben is that we're at the intersection of physics and poetry. And what he meant by that is that the physics of changing the world is drastically altering the world, and we haven't yet responded to it. All the scientific evidence, all of the truth-telling, all of that has not caused our society to change. And so maybe our best hope is in the poets. Not just poets, but authors of deep, deep books and songwriters. And so in this new element that we're going to have here on, I want to look at one author and listen to their words of wisdom and reflect on them a little bit. This session, we're going to look at Rebecca Solnit in her book, The Faraway Nearby. And we're just going to ponder a few words, but what you're going to discover is she's a fantastic crafter of words, of messages, and she understands the power of stories. Let's see what she says. We tell ourselves stories in order to live or to justify taking lives, even our own, by violence or by numbness and the failure to live. Tell ourselves stories that save us and stories that are quicksand in which we thrash and the well in which we drown. Stories of justification, of accursedness, of luck and star-crossed love, or versions clad in cynicism that is at times a very elegant garment. We think we tell stories, but stories often tell us. Tell us to love or to hate, to see or be blind. Often, too often, stories saddle us, ride us, whip us onward, tell us what to do, and we do it without questioning. The task of learning to be free requires learning to hear them, to pause and hear silence, to name them, and then to become the storyteller. Rebecca understands the power of stories, but she also understands the power of stories that keep us from seeing a new truth because they've been in our head and in our soul for our whole life. And what she's saying is we have to start to question the existing stories because the existing stories have brought us to this point in time where we're destroying the world, we're destroying the future for our grandkids. And her point that we need to pause so that we can question them stories and then to listen for new stories on how we can have a future that our kids can live into. And then to become the storyteller, to pass on our wisdom in a way that others will listen and not have their eyes glaze over. She has one further point I want to talk about. Sometimes an extraordinary or huge question comes along and we try to marry it off to a mediocre answer. People are going to tell you that all we need to do is get a little better gas mileage, or all we need to do is quit burning coal, or all we need to do is whatever. In truth, where we're at, where we've driven the world to, requires an absolute total answer, and that answer is all that oil, all that coal, all that gas has to stay right where it's at. If your kids and my kids are going to have a chance, that fossil fuel has to stay in the ground. We can't have mediocre answers. Those decades are behind us. We have to move with urgency. And that's a shocking change for people. And maybe the only way they'll hear it is by the poets and the songwriters and the great authors of great words. We need to become the storytellers of the way to live sustainably, using artists like Rebecca and the others who come on in later times to inspire us, to teach us how to tell the story. So that's our author wisdom this time. We talk about who's going to feel the effects first. And Typically, when we talk about feeling the effects of climate change first, we think about third world countries, we think about the poor, we think about other lands and other people and other times. But here's the reality. We're standing in front of a UCC church right in St. Pete's Beach that is just a few feet above sea level. When the rising of the seas caused by global warming expands the water, but more importantly, when the energy from the seas is released into storms, this is going to be one of the first places affected. Well, along with all of the billions of dollars of real estate invested in condos and apartments and vacation homes, there's also the very real reality, the very deep reality, that even places of faith are going to be threatened. So we have a be bold sign. But then if we turn around, we see that behind us are massive amounts of sewer pipe that's going to be installed. And the purpose of this piping is to try and hold off the effects of global warming for a few more years, because we have to greatly expand the sewage systems to drain away the storms and all the water that comes in and deluges all that. And so it's very important that we drain that massive amount of water away as it comes. Otherwise, it'll flood these places, the places that we live, the places that we vacation in, the places that we worship. But here's the reality. Sewer pipes, no matter how big the sewer pipes are, is not going to be enough. The only thing that's going to stop the effects of global warming is us. The only thing that's going to stop it in time is our urgency to act, to keep that oil, that coal, that gas deep in the ground, right where it belongs, to switch over to energy systems powered by the sun and the wind and the waves. That's the reality. Some people are going to feel this reality much sooner than others. Some are going to suffer the reality much sooner than others. But we all are. So for the sake of our kids, my kids and your kids, my grandchildren and your grandchildren, we have to change. We have to change now. Next up is a Telling It Forward segment on a specific action item that we would like you to include in your discussion today. It's one of 6 that you should be discussing, but it's going to go deeper into this one to give you an idea on how the other 5 might also be looked at. Don't neglect the other 5, but for right now, sit back and take in the truth of this one. So let's spend a moment with action item 34. And it uses words that you've heard before, but we need to go a little bit deeper. Action item 34 says, develop eyes to see and ears to hear so that you can understand the urgency of the climate crisis through the lived experience of others. That's the critical element, so that we can gain a greater understanding of the climate crisis, the urgency of it, through the lived experience of others. In the Gospel of Matthew, the 13th chapter, Jesus says, but blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. Truly, I tell you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. Eyes to see, ears to hear. That's the purpose of Journey. We come together understanding that we don't yet know all the truth. And in fact, we can't possibly know all the truth. But we're blessed by God in our lives through the gift of others who have a different lived experience. And from their sharing their lived experience, that gift, we might see and we might hear a deeper truth than we've been able to perceive. So to live out this action item means that we need to be open to people giving us witness, telling us of their lived experiences in places that we don't normally listen to or see. So we need to be open to the suffering of the developing world, of the island people, of the people who are experiencing climate change right here, right now, through facing the droughts and the floods and the storms. to see in their desperation, a desperation that's so strong to find a place that their kids can live, that they're willing to risk drowning to cross the Mediterranean Sea in a rubber boat or wherever they're coming from. This is hard work, being willing to listen, being willing to see. It's much more comfortable to turn away and say, don't bother me with that now. But God is calling us to see the difficult truth. And from that new understanding, then to act with the urgency that this crisis requires. That's what's necessary to provide a future for my kids and your kids, my grandkids and your grandkids. To understand the climate crisis is urgent. It's happening now. Even though we happen to love having warmer days where we're at, other people on other portions of the globe are dying for that same very reason. Eyes to see the difficult truth, hear the pain of their cries. Let that shared experience inform our lives going forward. Can we do this? Yes, we can. With God's help, we can. Until next time, seek out new voices, seek out new visions, and let that inform your life. Let that give you the courage, the tenacity, and the ambition to go forward. So that wraps up our video session for today. What's up next is for your discussion. That's every bit as important, if not more important, than all that we laid out before you. So gather together as a group. Spend some time with the scripture, but give yourself lots of time to dialogue about what you've seen and what you've heard, what has touched you, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. Take the time to listen very deeply to the wisdom each other shares. You never know when God is going to speak using another person's voice to give you a truth that you do not yet have. And then last but not least, in your discussion group, spend time with the 6 action items that we have in today's handout sheet. Until next time, enjoy the journey. I'm your host, Rev Dr. Terry Gallagher. See you further along the way.